example. You talk about the disparities in policing. Whenever the data of arrest for a offense that is being committed by every community in New York City, whether it be just white folks hanging out at the park, whether it be the Orthodox Jewish community having funerals and other services. We just found out the other day that NYPD approached an Orthodox Jewish school where 100 people were inside of a school building. I'm talking about not 2 months ago, just the other day. They were having school, no mask. And that is obviously not supposed to be happening. You think about that. You think about, all of the bars downtown where people are hanging out and congregating who don't look like us. And then you go to the hood, to the Bronx, to Brooklyn, to Harlem, to places where young Black people, first of all, Black and brown people, and people who are coming out of vulnerable and marginalized communities are. The data shows that the most of the arrests and tickets, summonses have been issued in those communities, while everyone else is also committing the same offense, right? You see that in the park where white folks are laying out and having a good time, not properly socially distancing, they're being distributed masks by the police department. But when they come into our communities, not only are they not dressed, all of them in their regular uniforms, in other communities, they're in the uniforms that are used for community relations, the light blue jackets, the things that let you know we're here as a community representative, not as an enforcement, police officer, so to speak. That's the difference in the ways in which they treat our community. And our police commissioner made some really, really specific comments the other day. He said when the data came out and the data showed that it was more than 80% Black folks, not Black, Latino, and whomever, Black people specifically, because that's important. And it doesn't mean that we, obviously a Latino sister was attacked by police officers in a situation that's deeply troubling, and we want to support her. But for the purpose of this conversation and the Rolling Out platform, we need to be very clear that it is over 90% Black people specifically who have received whatever the enforcement is around these arrests. So the issue for us, when you listen to the commissioner, when I connect this to voting, you listen to what the commissioner says. He says, yeah, disparities exist. So he acknowledges that, yes, the numbers show there's an issue. But he goes on to say, yeah, but people don't like to talk about the disparities in the murder rate. He says people don't like to talk about the disparities in robberies. So what he's basically saying is that the same people we're arresting or we're giving summonses to are dangerous because they commit all the murders and they also are the ones doing all the robberies. They're the ones responsible for all the crime. This is the language that is being used by the police commissioner in New York City. And he, of course, went on to say a bunch of other troubling things. So when we think about voting, we have to ensure that whoever we're voting for answers to us. Because in my judgment, those types of statements from a police commissioner should have meant his immediate removal, because he obviously has a bias against Black and brown people, which allows his officers to go out and terrorize our communities when they're not treating other people the same. And I'll say this, Munson, and be quiet. It's not that we're asking for and we've seen the videos. It's clear that they don't just arrest or just give out summonses. They're sitting in our necks. They're beating up our women. They're fighting young girls in the middle of the street. They're punching people in the face. They're erasing data from cell phones out of these young people's hands. They're doing all these things. We've seen it. And I think from our perspective, I think we have to ask ourselves, at what point do we have people in positions of power that when we say that behavior is not representative of what it is that we want, that it actually is respected? When I think about it, I think to myself, we want to be in a situation not where other communities are harmed. We don't want them to do that to anybody. We just also want to be respected.
I know this wasn't the question that you asked of me, but I've been in the world long enough to know that these are not unfortunate new incidents. In my early days, 12 years old, I got confronted by 6 white officers who falsely accused me of robbing a hamburger stand. And when the hamburger stand owner came out, I lived in Los Angeles, came out and told them that wasn't me, they just went away. When I think about how much this has escalated over the years, there is not a time when I turn on a video, open my phone, open an app where my heart doesn't break and you relive that moment. I think there is not just a need for us to not just recognize that this is a case, but there is a need for us to do something differently than we've been doing. Because this is not a new conversation. And by the way, it is not a conversation that unfortunately is not going to go away unless we choose as people of color, as Black people, as Black women, as Black leaders, as Black corporate leaders, to use our voices and to actually use our votes to make a difference. And that also means sometimes when we don't like the candidate who is running, right? I mean, sometimes we have to vote, and we have to vote between the choices, like the worst of the, the best of the worst. And so I think that we sometimes, we forget that there is sometimes a long game that also has to be played while we are in the midst of our frustration and anger and disappointment and repetitive. I mean, Black people are the most resilient people. You think about our history and the fact that we are even in this space having this conversation amidst all the things that are happening with COVID and everything that happened before it. We as Black people are resilient, but we as Black people need to vote.
Yeah, voting is key, but I think accountability is even more key, because we have seen that voting, even going to how we provide access. I think it's time to stop worrying about just voting and not being clear. But the numbers, what are the numbers saying, Kenyatta, about how we should go out? Because I'm still not seeing our community wearing masks.
Well, the numbers are saying that we should still be sheltering in place, but that's not happening. And unfortunately, when you open a state, as many states have done, it has given the false sense of security that it's okay to be out without mask and not social distance. And unfortunately, I was reading an article in the Washington Post the other day about how other communities aren't wearing masks and are posing an even greater risk to the Black and Brown communities for the spread of COVID-19, because they feel like, well, if they get it, then they have a 90% recovery, which I'm curious as to where those numbers came from. And then other communities also feel that, well, based on the data, which this data is true, COVID-19 is affecting Black and Brown communities more. So they feel like they don't have anything to worry about. But, when we're out in public and we're seeing other communities not wearing masks, so that also gives another level of false security, because they're like, well, if these people over here, if they're in North Atlanta not wearing masks, then it must be safe. So we don't need it either. Why are they telling us to wear masks? And it's because they're not looking at the numbers. They don't know that we're the community that's dying. Like, the numbers are affecting us. And when you have a president that was willing to shut down the COVID-19 task force, and it wasn't because he felt that it was safe, but the numbers showed that the people that were being affected were Black and Brown. So we need to really be aware of what's going on. We need to use social media for something other than entertainment, but use it as a source of education so that we can actually make adequate decisions about our health.
Ms. Castleberry, question from Facebook says, Black Twitter continues to be a powerful during this pandemic in terms of highlighting issues. How can Twitter work with leading voices like your panelists to help amplify and share resources in sharing positive information? You're on mute.
Unfortunately, sorry about that. Unfortunately, COVID prevented this from happening, but if you don't already follow Goddess Rivera, Godis Rivera on Twitter, you should. Goddess is in the process of working with Twitter, Black Twitter Universe, to create an event called Black Twitter Live. It was actually intended to be the first week of March. It was also the same week that we got notice that we would begin to work from home. So although she is moving that conversation from being in person to the platform itself, it is a way to convene the leading voices, not just in media, but also the leading voices on Black issues, to amplify and also to share support and resources that are happening. In addition to that, my team, the diversity partnership team, which is not the internal diversity inclusion team. So Goddess leads the individual influencers, and imagine people who are big users of Twitter with big followers, including Black Twitter and Latinx Twitter, LGBTQ Twitter, et cetera. My role is primarily focused on organizations that represent underrepresented people. So that would include the NAACP Urban League, Unidos US, the Human Rights Campaign. And we have been hosting what we're calling the Diversity Partnership Speaker Series. We have had 8 of them, and each of these series is focused on a specific demographic. And our intention in doing that was so that people could isolate with all the noise that is happening around COVID. How do we isolate that so that you know how this is affecting each of these demographic groups separately? We have moved now into intersectional conversations, because as you think about race, and you add on to that being a woman, and you add on to that LGBTQ, and you add on to that disabilities, and you add on to that, like when you think about the amount of intersections that we all represent, and each of them, unfortunately, bearing the burden of COVID in a very different way, it is going to call for us to begin to think about this not just as a single demographic, but as the multiple dimensions of diversity that we represent. Black people, Latinx people, the frontline service workers, essential workers, you add those layers, and we are the ones who are carrying the brunt of this. And so we will also be hosting a online Q&A to allow us to aggregate the resources by demographic groups. So stay tuned. You can follow me or follow @Twitter Together to get more information on that. But it'll be a way for us to amplify the resources that exist by demographic on Twitter itself. Follow Goddess, and you can stay attuned to what's happening with Black Twitter Live, which will answer some more specific questions about voices in the media and amplify them. But this is all an evolving situation. As you can imagine, many of us have been planning to do different things, including @Twitter, and we're all adjusting to think about ways to sort of still be impactful and engage people under these new circumstances.
Facebook's talking about the false sense of security. Obviously, Tamika, they're talking about Candi Burris and Tracy Morgan and individuals. What should we and what can we do to wake our influencers up, to share with them, both you and Dr. Stevens, that this is not a game and that we really are taking a very selfish approach versus being honest and authentic about preserving our community's health?
You know, it's powerful that you say that, because I think about my 21-year-old son who, one, because my mom's situation, she just recently became ill. And also because I think he was a little concerned. I had to say to him over and over again, you realize that if you get sick if you are asymptomatic and you transfer it to me, that I, along with my sister and my dad, are all your grandmother has, like us as a family. And if we give her our sickness, she literally could die. And I think that helped him to keep in mind, I can't go out, I can't hang out, girlfriend can't be in and out of the house. We gotta, figure it out. But as time has gone on, it's gotten a little bit harder, right? And I'll tell you one of the reasons why it's hard, Munson, if we here to talk, just us kicking it.
Gotta say it.
Yeah. He hasn't seen anybody he knows die. It's
Right.
been me, my friends, not my friends, and not even my friends, because he loves my friends. Those are his people. So not my friends, but it's been like my church, some people that I love, from church. It's been one of my friends who's a pastor had buried 13 members. It's been some of the pastors that I know have passed away. It's been distant from him. And when you think about 90,000 people dying in a country that has 320 plus million folks, not every family has actually been directly impacted by this situation. Even the one cousin that we had that we're very close to, who was very sick, she made it, and she's walking around, breathing, moving, and whatever. And as a young man, he wasn't as engaged every day like we were on a live. We were on Zoom, Face, whatever you want to call it, watching her, talking to the doctor, trying to be involved in the conversation with the doctors in her care. He didn't have to deal with that. He actually just appears just now. Hi, Tariq. It's nice to see you. But he wasn't actually involved every single day with her situation, with their, these different things. So it's very difficult. It's difficult because not everyone is actually experiencing this thing really close up. In my situation, I don't care but we're all different, right? When I think about it, we're different. Because I come from a space where I can see a man beaten or a woman hurt, and I'm ready to jump. But hey, I'm on the live, please. But we're not all of us have that same compassion for people we don't know. Right. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a situation where a lot of our people just don't see it. And I don't know, Munson, I don't know the answer. I mean, shit, if you see the number rising to 90,000 and understand that in some communities, only our people have died, I don't know what else it takes for you to recognize that we have a serious responsibility here. I don't know what else we do.
Dr. Stevens?
And it's basically the same sentiment that I have. And I've had this question over and over again, and I get countless DMs and text messages from friends and family saying, what do we do? And I just tell them invest in funeral homes because, hey, they're going to make money whether it's 10 people or 100 people. But unfortunately, with our communities, until it hits home, they don't believe it. And it shouldn't have to be that way. And so it kind of reminds me when I was working on the Ebola epidemic, and before Ebola was only seen in East Africa. And when it hit West Africa, they didn't believe that it was Ebola. So they thought, similar to what's happening here, that, it's just, the American people coming over here trying to give us a disease and trying to scare us. So what was happening is, the crazy thing is Ebola is visible. You're like bleeding from your eyes, mouth, whatever. So they could actually see the sickness, but they still didn't believe it until they were losing entire families. And so they began hiding their sick. And then at night, when they would pass away, they were throwing the bodies into the river, which was the locals, their only source of clean water at the time. And so I see similarities here where it's like, well, I don't believe it because I can't see it. So I don't know if you could actually see the virus coming out of somebody's mouth, head, or whatever, maybe that would make them believe, because obviously the numbers aren't making them be proactive with their health. And just wearing a mask, and it's like I tell people, they was like, well, why do I have to wear a mask? And I was like,
that's a major debate.
Yeah, and I say, well, if you run into someone and they sneeze in your face and they're positive, then pretty much you're going to catch it, hands down. And if you really don't, know if someone else in your home is like, immunocompromised, because we think about Black and brown communities, like here in Hall County with the chicken plant workers that were sick, that were mostly brown people. And so their numbers, when we were looking at their numbers, they had 10 to 12 people per household. So there was no way they could self-quarantine. There was no way they could tell their loved ones, oh, well, I've tested positive. Y'all need to go somewhere else. That's not an option. So the best thing you can do for yourself and your community is to wear a mask, social distance, and just be aware of others. And I mean, dare I say it, it's like almost like a selfish behavior that we've acquired in our community where, we're only thinking about ourselves and our comfort. But it has to go beyond that.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything you said is so powerful. And we live in a selfish time. That's just the way it is. When I think about, I love young people. I work with them every day. But I also recognize that they're very disconnected from community and family. And I think social media has a lot to do with that. That cell phone has them and their video games, they're in their own space. They don't play with other kids the way they used to. They don't go outside and, write hopscotch on the ground and the things that we did and the ways in which we had Candi. You know what I'm talking. We had to
hopscotch.
Right, we had to work together in teams.
I finished that. Yes.
In order to be able to get things done, to get up the tree, they don't have to do that anymore. They're very combative, competitive, and in an individual way, not like in a team against team type of way. So I think you have some of that going on. And I think from an enforcement perspective, when you talk about New York's police department, many of the videos, if you watch them where the abuse has happened to people in the Black community, the police officers are not wearing masks themselves. So police officers are actually arresting people and giving them tickets, and they don't have the mask on. So who is setting the example? The president of the United States says he's not wearing a mask. Pence has been going, the vice president, to visit places and hasn't been wearing a mask. So the mixed messaging is so crazy that how do you expect young people to sit and say, okay, we have a responsibility to do X, Y, and Z thing. And it's very unfortunate because when I think about our celebrities and others who have, obviously, many of them have tried. Many of them have tried, but we've also had some doing music videos in New York saying we outside, we're having a good time. If I'm a young person, I'm going to go with the path that's easy.
Yeah.
So I found more than anything that conversation seems conflicted. You've got cultural conflictions going on, and you can help me with this, Ms. Castleberry, and there hasn't been one message. This nation doesn't have a solid message. So why do you think, who and how do we trust? And even you, Dr. Stevens, how do we get a solid one-pronged message out of Black Twitter?
Yeah, so the thing that you probably already know is Black Twitter is not like a group you don't just call Black Twitter meeting and people just appear. Black Twitter is it's not a secret society, but Black Twitter is stealth, you know what I mean? And they show up when they need to show up, and then there's not a meeting to even show up. It's the issue, it's the cause. And I think that although Black Twitter is probably one of the most powerful voices on the platform, I think we also have to look out back into our own families. We have to look into our own communities, people that people talk to every day. And that there is a shared responsibility. I think it's not just, the same example that Tamika just gave in trying to talk to her son. I feel like we have to have multiple, it can't be a single prong approach. It almost has to be everywhere you go that you actually you're getting that message. If you get on Twitter, you get the message. You get on Facebook, you get on IG, you go home. It's we have to reinforce that in a way that there's no way that you can get away from having this conversation. And it has to be consistent. That's the piece that's not consistent. So if you're interacting with police, they should have on a mask. If you're interacting at the grocery store, they should have on a mask, so that you see that you're the only one who's not doing it, versus you being in an environment where there is the missed message. So I don't think that the answer is a single-pronged approach. The single-pronged approach means everybody wears a mask. The other is, I think, quite frankly, that we have to strike the balance that some people don't care if we live. And so I'm speaking now as Candi, Candi, Black before Twitter, Black at Twitter, Black after Twitter, right? That the reality is that there are people who are going to give us a missed message intentionally to ensure that the things that we need to know that we don't get. This is not new information. I think a part of the challenge, even in having some of these conversations around pre-COVID impact on diverse communities, current COVID, and in the future, is that these disparities around Black people, underrepresented people, women, every intersectional underrepresented voice have pre-existed. All we're doing is seeing them exacerbated during this time. But the same people who didn't care about it before to prevent it aren't suddenly developing some consciousness to do something different. And so if we don't realize that we own our own lives and we are responsible for each other, then we will continue to contribute to these rates by our choice and contribution, not because somebody didn't tell us. The information is there. And the last thing I would say is that, there is an opportunity, as always, for us to be thinking about maybe not just a shared message, but a shared approach, right? Because, I think of I don't have children myself, but I have nieces and nephews. And the example that I set for them does matter. And by the way, it's as hard not having children, but having parents as it is having children, because trying to make sure that my mother doesn't sneak out to the grocery store because she just feels like she needs to go and do something, or trying to convince our parents that this is serious, particularly, although my parents have taken it more seriously. I remember when this started and Twitter told us this, Twitter was probably one of the first companies to stay home. And when I told my parents, I said, everybody, wherever you are, I need you to go and get groceries. My mother said, well, the stores were stocked. And I said, that's not what I asked you. I didn't ask you to take inventory. I asked you to buy groceries. So by the time she actually realized it, then she was in this whole situation. And I'm the one who ended up having to run around, do all these things. So I think there is opportunity for us to collaborate more, succinctly as a community. I think that we also have to be the role models that we want other people to be for us. We have to tell people where to find sources of truth if they don't believe us, that aggregate all of these pieces of information together, things that are happening in our communities, things that are happening at home. That we didn't mention anything about the church. The church also has some responsibility in this, because many of us grew up in Black churches, believe what the pastor says, right? So there's an element of that. So I do think it's a holistic approach, multi-pronged, but not one single, there's not a single answer to how to solve for this. I'm sorry, I got a little bit.
Yeah, that was church. That was a little bit of church. No, you gotta have a little bit of church. We always gotta have a little bit of church. No, but the question of one message, it needs to be clear. Because our community, I don't know if we got to have one prong. Collectively, we got to say everybody go vote. We can't have these debates. I'm not on you might have a different prong. I'm like, no, we got to vote.
Yeah.
You have to exercise. If you're not resetting during this entire moment, then we're gonna lose generations. It's the disparities going to continue. And then what happens to COVID-21?
Right.
For me, that, get COVID-19, you can get COVID-21. Why is it important to have one message, Dr. Stevens? Because I think it's really important that our community understand that from a health professional, one message would have solved so much.
Well, it builds trust. And so when COVID-19 first surfaced, there were messages, Black people can't get it. If the heat will kill it, if you make this concoction and breathe this steam, you're fine. And then all of that had to be retracted and said, okay, you're going to have to wear a mask, where before they said you don't have to wear a mask in public. So I think as Black and Brown communities, we need voices. We need a unified voice. We need one source for the community to go to fact check, because you do have people that are intentionally poisoning the message for Black people and intentionally confusing Black people so that they don't know what to believe. There's so many videos that have surfaced. You wouldn't believe, like the college students that sent, is this true? I saw this video. And then now with so many mechanisms to reach a broad audience of people, like Facebook Live, and anybody can just jump on live and just start spreading some rhetoric with no base. And depending on the audience, if they don't have a resource that they can go to and say, okay, I heard this, so let me go to this one trusted source where I know that this information is true, sort of like what Candi said, like we need, like this should be like your list of truth, and say, okay, well, so-and-so said this, and this isn't true, and this isn't true, and this isn't true. And that hasn't happened for the Black community. So, you know, we think about the civil rights movement where we had one voice, we had one source. And so essentially that's what we need to kind of bring into like a health rights movement, because we don't have it right now. And we're still depending on someone else to tell us what to do with our health instead of getting the information that we need so that we can make our own decisions about our health care. And that's missing.
You know, I'm just sitting there thinking that, like, first of all, Candi nor Dr. Stevens said this. Tamika Mallory said it, so they can write it down and, you know, make sure the crazy radical chick is the one saying this radical stuff. The federal government failed us terribly.
Yes.
People can say that, well, you know, Obama wasn't the best and okay. But under the Obama administration, we know good and damn well that there would have been a message that from Jay-Z and Beyonce to Ray Ray and Lucy to white folks out west to Asian people living, you know, in wherever, everybody would have at least had a consistent message coming out of the White House where we can take pieces from it and use it in our communities. He would have did it with the dope dip. Michelle would have did it with some Gucci boots on. It would have been, and they would have done it suited and booted and ready to go. It would have been in all those different ways.
And wore a mask.
And wore a mask. Press conferences may have been held through this type of forum. Even if they had to step to the podium, people would not have been speaking back to back on a microphone that wasn't cleaned, wasn't covered, so that they could show the American public what it looks like to be socially distant. We're dealing with it's a crisis. It's a crisis. To have this man go from 1 week telling people, you know, maybe if you use a little bleach, use a little Clorox, you know, we could possibly get better. Maybe you can put a light up your butt and that might actually make the virus go away. To this week, he takes the hydro, whatever that name of the thing is, Dr. Stevens knows better than me. This man is literally killing people and it's really not funny. Like literally people are dying because their leadership is not coming from a perspective that gives us control, discipline. You got people locked in their homes who are not doing well mentally. And you start telling them Clorox and this and that and the third, and just throwing people off. And I was having an argument with somebody, which leads me to my next point, but I was having an argument with somebody who I love very much and I work with them every day. And the person said to me, yeah, well, you know, no, the president can't just. You know, the president doesn't get to just kind of like, that's something that I expect when I watch David Letterman and, you know, whomever in the late night show. Mm-hmm. From that podium, I want real information, you know, and that's not what we've received. So you can't be mad at folks across the country who are just kind of like all over the place because hell, I think it was in Florida, the governor said he didn't even know that asymptomatic people could pass it around.
Georgia.
That was Kemp quote.
Huh?
That was old Kemp down here.
Oh, that was in Georgia?
That was Kemp, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So how you gonna be mad at people who can't even get real solid information from the government, which is important, but that brings me to my next point, that you can't trust nothing that they say anyway. So we're in a situation here where people, the 5G is a thing, you know, whether or not they just killing Black folks in the hospitals, which they could be because they kill Black women every day when we walk in and say we feel a pain, we got a thing going on, my heart, my chest, or whatever. We don't get the type of treatment that we deserve. We don't get the pain medicine that we deserve. We don't get, you know, the attention that we deserve. And we know that. So now you got Black women specifically who've been showing up at hospitals saying, I'm sick. And they say, go home. You're fine. You're not. You're dust. Keep going 3-4 times. Next time you come back, you're going on a ventilator. And we already know that most of the people who go on ventilators don't live. So we're dealing with a situation where, as to Dr. Stevens' point, the propaganda, the people, I had to argue down a great brother and say, you're telling me about what some little doctor who says they're a doctor, you don't even know this person. Like, this is somebody that you just saw in a video on YouTube. It's telling you that everything the government says is wrong. Don't wear a mask, don't do this, all of these different things. And meanwhile, people that you work with every day are telling you the opposite. And you're bringing up this person that came out of nowhere that's trying to tell you opposite of what we need to do for our communities. But I understand the trauma, because the trauma says we've never been able to trust what the government tells us to do. And we've seen over time how the government has actually worked against our people rather than for us. And so now when we're dealing with a virus that hasn't really impacted my family, I ain't too sure what they're talking about. The flu killed 70,000 plus people in just 2017. There was no ticker on CNN every day about that. So people are confused, and it is because we do not have a leader in place that even if you don't agree with them, you at least can believe what they're saying.
I think in light of the fact that at least until the next vote, that may or may not change, and that's a whole conversation for a whole nother day.
Yes.
I think that we as Black people have to decide what our own path is. I think that if you look at history, we have rarely been able to rely on government systems to be our protectors. We have rarely been able to rely on judicial systems to protect us. And so we have often found ourselves leaning on each other. And I think that if we don't figure out how to take care of ourselves, we will die faster than waiting for the government to change their whole mentality, methodology, isms, whatever exists in the minds of people that are causing these problems is not going to be changed during COVID.
No.
And is not likely to be changed after. So my hope in the spirit of Dr. Angelo is that hope and fear cannot exist in the same place. And we must choose one. And so for me, I will always choose hope to stay. But hope does not mean, in the spirit of Deepak, right, Shakura, that hope means that we have to do something. And so when I look at all of you, like, and whether it's Munson calling us together and Tamika being out on the front lines and Kenyatta out there telling us the facts so that we know, we must all do something different and more than what we are doing today to save our people. And it is not dependent on, unfortunately, external forces outside of our own community to save us. We must be the voice of our own people. We must be the people who are spreading the truth. And we must continue to stay on the front lines, even though we are tired, because the people who are going to lead this change are not the ones who are sitting at home watching it. It's going to be the people who are willing to risk their own lives, who are willing to speak when, unfortunately, people don't want to hear them, and to say the things that we are talking about today, which is the truth. So I appreciate Munson bringing us together. I appreciate you, Sister Tamika, for all that you do and continue to do, and your voice of truth. And Dr. Kenyatta, I am so grateful to have met you today, because I will count you as one of those new voices of truth. And I think that all of us need to find our voices of truth so that we can stay the course, even on
So we got about 7 minutes. I want to close this out. We need to get your final thoughts, Tamika, because I think so many right now are looking for a moment of truth. People their heads are banging. Everybody is tired of being at home, but we can't fail ourselves now. We can't stop paying attention now. Can you give us kind of your last thoughts? And obviously I'm coming around the horn to you other ladies as well.
You know, I think that my final words of truth would be very much so along the lines of what Candi Castleberry has said. We already know what we're dealing with, right? We already know that we live in a capitalist society that is specifically focused on corporations and making money. And so they're not going to tell you to take CMOS and aloe vera and, you know, and drink and do the things that help you keep your immune system up. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to push the vaccines. They're going to do all those things. I don't know if they're pushing it, and some of us think because they're trying to kill us, but I know that they're pushing it because from a capitalist perspective, it works for them because all their homies get to make money. We know that. But we also know grandma's remedies, right? We know what grandma has been telling us for years. We know what our neighbors have been doing. We know about the love and sharing and community that we've always had as a people. And in this moment, it feels to me like the COVID-19 moment is an opportunity for us to do those things again. So wearing a mask is not about you. You don't have to like masks. You could care less about it. You could say, I want the COVID. Let me just see how it feels. But don't give it to me where I'm going to bring it to my 74-year-old mother who just had a massive stroke and is trying to live. Don't do it. Don't do that. You know, let's have a little bit of community. And I hope that Black folks are able to turn on in them this idea that before we were enslaved, we had community. While we were enslaved, we had community. After enslavement, we've had to have community. It is the only way that we've ever been able to get anything, to accomplish anything, is with community. And with that, you know, I saw a quote where Malcolm X said that if we transform the idea of I, and this is his 95th birthday today, I think, so it's fitting to be saying this. If we transform the idea of I to we, even illness can turn into wellness. That's what he said. If we transform the idea of I into we, even illness can turn into wellness. And I think that that community approach is what we've got to take right now to turn even the illness of so many things into the wellness that our people actually need.
Thank you. Dr. Stevens?
I guess. So for me, I want to give the message that truth and health are uncomfortable. And we have to step outside our perceived normal of a comfort zone so that we can help, if not just one person, but just the community as a whole. And so we have to embrace community. This is not the time to stand by and say, well, I don't know anybody, it's not happening to me. So, you know, I'm just going to continue to do X, Y, Z. And it's not that. This is about being a part of something bigger than you. And I know that's not my saying, but it's just, it's a part of being, it's a part of community and a sense of self-worth, which I think has been stripped away over the years. And so it's easier to set up that barrier of, well, it's not happening, you know, to me. So I'm just going to put this wall up and this is where I'm going to stay until it does happen to me. So this is the time where we're going to have to be uncomfortable. And that's just the truth. If we have to build our health, you're going to have to exercise. Like these preconditions were existed before COVID-19 got here. It just made us more of a target. So now is the time to be uncomfortable. If you want to make a difference, if you're sitting out there and you're saying, well, what can I do? Start with you. Exercise. Get some, follow these people, get the knowledge, because you're going to have to start somewhere. You just can't keep listening. You have to be a doer.
Thank you. Ms. Castleberry.
I generally end these conversations with this anonymous quote that I've used forever, and it is always reminds me about the choices that we all have, and it says that we've been given each day to use as we will. We can waste it or use it for good. When tomorrow comes, this day will be gone forever, and in its place are the things that we left behind. And for me, I think that we are called as Black people, we are called to do this work. And you have not invited us here because these are people who are just here to talk. I mean, all of us are involved in this work and care about humanity. We care about Black people. And so I just want to say that, if we've been given this day to use as we will, we can waste it, use it for good. Today, the fact that we spent time here, and for those who are listening and those who stayed on, together, we have done something good because we've moved a step further. And I just want to say that it's important for us to lift up those people who are out on the forefront. If you're not the person who's going to go and do the work, then lift up those who are. If you're not the person who believes that you need a mask, then wear a mask for somebody who you care about. If you're not the person who is going to go and fight and stand in the street for justice, then lift up the people who are willing to risk their lives. But even if you choose to be passive and not do the thing yourself, do the thing that helps the people who are doing the work. And so with that, I thank you, Munson, for doing this work. I thank you, Kenyatta. I thank you, Tamika. And I'm just grateful that you all are doing the work. And I would say anything I can do personally to lift you, know that I will keep you in my prayers, because we are going to need prayers and a whole lot of lifting in order for this work, for people to survive this.
Yes.
I want to thank you all for coming and spending this time on Healthcare IQ. I do want to say it's a time to reset. Reset your thinking internally as a community. We have to have a collective good. I'm going to challenge Tamika to actually come up with some active KPIs for our community. And that's key performance indicators. The same with Kenyatta Health, key performance indicators. Ms. Castleberry, we really need to have key communication indicators. It is not, we cannot afford not to measure ourselves anymore. We don't need a community, even our influencers, Tamika, have to get on your key performance indicators. If we're not going to have everybody that says they're part of the movement and they're part of the hip hop movement and they're part of the Black movement and they aren't helping people vote, if we're not going to get our people to exercise and share with them the number of steps they need to take for a day, then this whole reset was for naught. So that's my only ask, that we all begin to set some KPIs so that we can measure our community and so that our children will know the numbers of their success and be able to measure their behavior and their future. Right now, we have no collective binding numbers. I'm Munson Steed, and thank you all for Health IQ. Peace.
Thank you.
Love. Thank you
so much, Munson.
Thank you.
Bye, ladies.